I've never seen a single piece of credible evidence that the President of the United States engaged in wrongdoing with minors, ever. So like when the president says the hoax, that's what he's talking about, is this democratic idea that he somehow was a pedophile. It's absurd. There's no evidence for it.
Trump was named over 3,000 times in the Epstein files. 3,000 times. And JD Vance, Vice President of the United States, Peter Thiel puppet, future 2028 presidential candidate already polishing his reputation, just looked at Joerogan and said he's never seen a single piece of credible evidence. Not one piece. This is what we're doing today. 17 minutes of JD Vance running cover for his boss, lying about the evidence, contradicting himself in real time. And Joerogan, who once told Theo Vaughn to get off his antidepressants for suggesting less than this, sitting there nodding along like a good little helper.
I think the president, completely separate from any influence from Israel, believes very strongly, and again, I agree with this, that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon.
Right,
and I
but
think he was
after
willing
we
to do things.
bombed them in June, right? That was the initial attack, right?
June of last year.
Yeah.
Midnight Hammer, yeah.
Right.
Completely separate from any influence from Israel. He just said that, out loud, on a podcast. In 2026, Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. Fine, sure, but Israel has had nuclear weapons for decades. Nobody talks about that. Nobody asks about that. And JD Vance just sat there and said Trump's entire Middle East foreign policy is completely separate from Israeli influence, while the man is currently being photographed with Netanyahu every other week, and the U.S. just bombed Iran in June. Joerogan didn't ask a single follow-up question. Not one. Before we get into the clips, I want to show you something. The most liked comment on this episode, 11,000 likes. The Peter Thiel experience. Joe's own audience isn't watching anymore. They're going straight to the comments. They're treating the comment section like a spoiler thread for a show they no longer trust. They want to know what happened before they commit 3 hours to watching Joe nod. 11,000 people calling it the Peter Thiel experience. And they haven't even seen what we're about to show you. Let's go.
There's a lot of talk about how much is the Israeli government influencing American politics, and there are certainly certain people within the Israeli government who hate the deal, and we see exact evidence. There was a Times story that came out yesterday that basically there are certain influencers in America who are being paid in order to attack the deal. I think some of it's just pure political ideology, right? It's foreign policy perspectives that are much different from mine. They think that America should that we can basically, you can wave a magic wand with the military and accomplish whatever you want. And, it's not that simple. You actually have to have a very clear objective. Military power can accomplish a clear objective, but you've got to have that clear objective. You can't just say, we're going to bomb until something good happens. That never works. The United States has tried that before. So I think it's a combination of things, but I definitely think you have seen this very discreet, extremely well-funded campaign to try to derail the negotiation and try to derail the deal.
This is the JD Vance special move. You ask him a direct question and he responds with 5 answers, none of which are to the question you asked. Did Israel influence Trump's decision to bomb Iran? He spent a full minute and a half talking about paid influencers, military doctrine, peace negotiations, hawks and doves, everything except an actual answer. And just watch how Joe handles it. He doesn't. He just lets the clock run. He nods. He goes, yeah, he says, right. He does his little thinking face. He does absolutely nothing. This is the same man who spent 3 hours interrogating Tom Papa about sourdough bread. But the Vice President of the United States says, completely separate from Israeli influence. And Joe goes, interesting, yeah. Slow Joe, you're embarrassing yourself.
Do you think he would have continued with the most recent campaign if it wasn't for the influence of Israel?
Yes, I do.
Really?
I do, yeah. Look, I think, again, and I see this, and I see it even from people that are in our coalition, and this would be my flip side to the hawks who have been attacking me or the president mercilessly over negotiation. I would sort of turn this back on some of the doves or some of the realists who have been attacking the president of the United States.
The doves? Those are the peace people?
Peace people.
That's what you call them, the
hawks
doves?
And doves. You never heard that phrase?
I've heard hawks. I've heard hawks. I don't think I've ever heard doves.
Hawks and pigeons, hawks and I don't know.
Credit where it's due. Joe actually asked a real question there. Do you think he would have continued with the campaign if it wasn't for the influence of Israel? And JD Vance said yes. He said yes. And then in the same breath pivoted to, but the idea that Trump was blackmailed is crazy. Don't even think about it. Now, the Epstein files, which JD Vance's own administration released, contain over 3,000 references to Donald Trump. Trump flew on Epstein's plane. Epstein had Trump's number in his contact book. These are documented facts. Not Democratic conspiracy, not a hoax. Documents. And JD Vance just told you there's no credible evidence. Joerogan did not bring up a single one of those documents. Not one.
What I think a lot of people, I've heard this argument, is this idea that Donald Trump, was sort of, I've even heard people say he was blackmailed into this by
a
the
lot
Israelis.
of people think that.
That's not true, dude.
No?
It's just not true. I've seen the decision making up close. Again, whether you agree or disagree with our negotiation, or whether you agree or disagree with the decision to launch the campaign Epic Fury to begin with, the idea that Donald Trump is being blackmailed is crazy to me. Because again, I see the way that he makes decisions. I see the way that he processes this stuff. Like the idea that he picks up the phone with anybody and says, hey, I'm going to take orders from you. No, that's just not how Donald Trump operates.
Could you understand, though, why people would come to that conclusion, especially because of the Epstein files?
What do you mean?
Well, the Epstein files were supposed to be released, and there was a tremendous amount of resistance to those files being released, and that concerned a lot of people. Because if you're talking about very wealthy, powerful people that were engaged in crimes,
I see. So you're basically saying the fear is that whatever's in the Epstein files was used to blackmail the administration into doing the Iran thing.
Or at the very least, the people that were involved in the Epstein files that didn't want them coming out had undue influence.
Well, again, say this with all candor, we absolutely screwed up the comms of the Epstein files, we just did. But do I think the reason we screwed up the comms is because we were trying to hide something? No. I think the reason we screwed up the comms of the Epstein files is one, Pam Bondi said the client list is on my desk, right?
Well, they had binders. They were standing in front.
But those binders were largely documents that had already been released, right? So let me try to
what was the
defend.
purpose of that performative display of the Epstein files? And she was saying there's tens of thousands of hours of film.
I don't know what the purpose of it was, but I know that the effect of it was to make people mistrust the entire effort. And what I think was happening, look, I know Pam, I like Pam. I don't think there was anything malicious going on. I think Pam was trying to respond to the political moment. I think she overstated what we had and what we didn't have. And I think that she, got roasted for it publicly by a lot of people, including me. You and I have talked about this a lot. I'm one of the OG Epstein conspiracy theorists. I've probably gone down every single rabbit hole. We could go down most of them today.
We screwed up the comms. That's it. That's the explanation. The most documented trafficking operation in modern history. The files the entire world was waiting for. The files Trump promised to release, then delayed, then partially released. And JD Vance's explanation is, we screwed up the comms. It was a messaging problem, mate. And then, and I need you to hear this, JD Vance describes himself as one of the OG Epstein conspiracy theorists. He's gone down every rabbit hole. He knows all of it. And his conclusion, after going down every rabbit hole as the Vice President of the United States with access to the actual files, is no credible evidence. Trump is clean. Nothing to see here. Brother, are you on crack? You just told us you went down every rabbit hole. You have unlimited access to information. Your words coming up very shortly. And your verdict is there's no credible evidence against the man who was named 3,000 times in those files?
What is it like being the vice president? How much access do you have to information?
So I'll give you another conspiracy. So I have effectively unlimited access to information.
Unlimited.
But I think that one of the things that I've learned about the job is you're doing so much on the day-to-day. You're calling senators and trying to get them to pass a piece of legislation. You're meeting with staff about what should go in the housing bill. You're negotiating with the Iranians or the Qataris or the Israelis about something that's going on in the Middle East. And a lot of it, like the UFO thing, I've said that I'm going to look into the UFO thing. And I've been saying that for a year and a half, and I haven't done it yet because I haven't had the time. And so some of this is you just have to have the time to actually punch through the walls and to go to the gatekeepers and say you have to open up that gate because I'm the vice president. And some of it is just hard to actually get to because I don't have the time to sort of focus on that one issue for any particular period of time. So the answer is you have unlimited access to information. The constraint is not people tell me no. The constraint is you're just so busy doing other shit.
Right. So they were specifically going after him for underage sex. And they didn't look at the full picture of the operation.
They didn't even try to. They didn't even try to.
Well, that was one of the things about the prosecutor was told that he was above their pay grade. I mean, it was one of the things that he
said he was like CIA or something.
Yeah.
Right?
He said I was told he was intelligence.
That's right. And yes, I've asked were there documents connecting Jeffrey Epstein directly to our intelligence agencies or anybody else's? And the answer is no. But if that shit existed, it wouldn't exist in 2026.
Stop right there. JD Vance just told you he has effectively unlimited access to information as vice president. Unlimited. His word. The constraint is not people telling him no. The constraint is just that he's very busy. And then in the same segment, he tells you that all the key evidence from Epstein's original investigation was disappeared. Destroyed. Gone before 2007. So let me get this straight. You have unlimited access. Nobody tells you no. You're the vice president of the United States. You're an OG Epstein conspiracy theorist who's gone down every rabbit hole. And the evidence is just gone? You had unlimited access to nothing? That Peter Thiel puppet just contradicted himself in the space of 4 minutes on Joerogan's podcast, and Joerogan did not say a single word about it. This is not an accident. JD Vance knows exactly what he's doing. He's building his 2028 presidential resume in real time. He needs to look like the guy who tried to get answers on Epstein while simultaneously making sure those answers never implicate anyone who matters. And Slow Joe just handed him the microphone and stepped back.
Do I think there is I've never seen a single piece of credible evidence that the President of the United States engaged in wrongdoing with minors, ever. So like when the president says the hoax, that's what he's talking about, is this democratic idea that he somehow was a pedophile. It's absurd. There's no evidence for it. Now, like again, in our defense, yes, was there some bitching and moaning, and was there some back and forth? Yes, but we eventually collected 6 million documents as part of the effort. The president, people say the president was forced into releasing the documents. Like, again, the idea that Donald Trump could not have killed that legislation, especially with the United States Senate, is a joke. He absolutely could have killed it. What did he do? He actually said, nope, we're going to release these files. He thought, he was annoyed by the story. He was annoyed by the Democrats accusing him of doing things bad.
He just said it again. Same line, word for word, almost verbatim to the cold open. I've never seen a single piece of credible evidence. That's not an argument. That's a press release on loop. You don't say the same exonerating line twice in the same interview unless someone told you to say it twice. This man came in here with a job to do. And if that shit existed, it wouldn't exist in 2026? Brother, that is the whole point. That is literally what everyone is worried about. You're confirming the concern while describing it as a reason not to worry.
Look, the original sin of the Epstein investigation, and obviously I'm biased here, but it was not what Donald Trump and the administration did in 2025. It was, you have to go back to 2007, 2008. The original Alex Acosta investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, where he basically dropped the federal charges. I think Epstein ended up getting prosecuted on some sort of local thing. But the original warrant, back in 2008, what was he looking for? What was he allowed to look for? What were they collecting? It was not looking at a broader conspiracy. So that happens, okay? Epstein gets pinched. I think he goes to prison, or maybe this is when he was on house arrest. Mm-hmm. But like anything that existed from the 80s and 90s up to 2006, 2007, anything that existed that we didn't get back then was disappeared, right? So like when people say, has what you've seen on the inside make you think that that Epstein never blackmailed people or that Epstein never engaged in broader sex trafficking? No, absolutely not. What I have seen, and I've looked at most of the files, is that there just wasn't dispositive evidence. And if that dispositive evidence ever existed, it was probably destroyed after 2006, 2007. Now, the Epstein law gets signed. We find 6 million documents. We find out 3 million of them are actually responsive, has something to do with the Epstein estate. We release all of them, with the exception of a few things that are like, the courts have said that we have to redact certain things or we can't release certain files. But like, we did release all these files. Did it take longer than it should have taken? Yes. But we did release these files. And again, the problem here is not like anything that's in the files or not in the files. The problem is, if you go back to the original investigation, it was designed in a way that was way too narrow. If there was a broader conspiracy, and my view is that there probably was, the evidence that existed in 2007, that was the opportunity to get
So
it.
when you say there probably was a broader conspiracy, what exactly are you saying?
I think there are a few different options. I mean, look, man, I like you and I could literally do 2 episodes about this. I've gone on down to every rabbit hole. There's this funny New York Times story that's somewhat true, somewhat false, but where Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, says, well, we know JD's a conspiracy theorist on this. Like, I am, actually. I've gone down every rabbit hole here. Look, so there's the theory that whether it was American intel or foreign intel, that Epstein was sort of using sort of the sex ring to blackmail rich and powerful people. There's that piece of it. I think there's a separate conspiracy that hasn't gotten covered as much, which is that Epstein actually, okay, if you go back to the original Epstein guy was Les Wexner, okay, who Columbus, Ohio, was the wealthiest person in Ohio, maybe still is the wealthiest person in the state of Ohio. The thing that everybody in Columbus, I lived there for a time, knew about the Wexner-Epstein relationship is that Epstein was his tax guy. That Epstein was like the genius at identifying weird tax strategies that would allow you to not have to pay taxes, but if you were being a little skeptical, would also say that it would allow Epstein to either blackmail people or to have a separate nexus of influence and control on rich and powerful people. And so I think there's an underreported, underexplored story of was Epstein like doing a lot of tax stuff that was not on the up and up, and is that one way in which he gained blackmail? It's not opposite of the sexual blackmail story, but in some ways it's you could imagine both things being true.
Now here's where it gets interesting, because JD Vance is actually willing to go deep on Epstein as long as the names involved are Les Wexner, Israeli intelligence, and unnamed rich and powerful people. The moment it gets anywhere near Donald Trump, he's never seen a single piece of credible evidence. And I want to give JD a tiny bit of credit here. He says he'll go to his deathbed believing there's a story. He thinks Epstein was running a broader operation, blackmail, tax schemes, compromising the powerful. He thinks the original investigation was deliberately too narrow. He basically describes a cover-up, just not one that involves his boss. And now I want to talk about something, because Joerogan is sitting here, and he's nodding along to JD Vance's Epstein theories, and he's even got his own Epstein story. Someone tried to get him to meet Epstein in 2017. Joe Googled it and said, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Good on you for not going, Joe. But do you remember what happened the last time one of your friends sat in that chair and raised serious questions about Trump and Epstein and the people surrounding him? Theo Vaughn. Theo sat in that chair and raised these questions, and Joe told him he sounded crazy. Told him to get off his antidepressants. Told him he was going too far down the rabbit hole. And then months later, in a completely different episode, Joe quietly apologized. Almost all of us feel like Theo. That's the thing Joe doesn't understand. He thinks Theo is the outlier. He thinks the guy sitting across from him right now, the Vice President of the United States, the man who just said 3 times there's no credible evidence about the man named 3,000 times in the files, is the reasonable one in the room. That is how disconnected Slow Joe has become from the people who actually watch his show.
It's all just a cat and mouse game. People are like, we'll elect the Democrats next time. It's like, but it's all the same shit has been happening forever. They haven't been helping anybody forever. They're letting fucking politicians slip on kids. All of our fucking money goes to Israel, and they're using it to fucking genocide people. It's like everybody is scared out of their wits right now. It's like Satan is amongst us, and our religious leaders are fucking talking about bullshit at the poll. It's just like, what is going? I don't know, man.
We got to get you off those antidepressants, son. You're losing your fucking marbles.
You think I am?
Come hang out with us. Just chill out.
I'm here.
Just chill out at the mothership tonight.
I do have to pee in a little while, but
You can pee.
I'm going to pee in a minute, man.
We'll let you.
But no, people are just scared, dude. This is
They
shit
won't
that I
let you
hear
in
from
Canada.
people.
They won't let you pee until you give them your guns.
Really?
That's how they're doing it now. It's just like a really well-made show.
Yeah. That show was fascinating. He did it.
All right, dog. We gotta wrap this up soon.
Dude, that's fine with me. I thought you were. I was staying here because you're here.
No, I love you.
I love you
but
too,
I have
man.
things I gotta do.
Me too.
Are you gonna be around tonight? Or are you going back?
I might stop by.
I had one of my guests try to get me to meet him.
Really?
Yeah.
When?
2017.
See, that's crazy to me because at that point he'd already gone down for at least one like sex abuse thing.
That was my position. I'll show you the emails.
Okay.
They're kind of funny.
Which
I
guest?
actually read them on stage.
You want to say? Okay, fine.
People can find it.
Yeah.
I don't want to have the guy's already ruined.
Sure. But dude, it's
I Googled it and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
In fact, one of the interesting things the Epstein saga reveals about, and I try to make this point, is one of the reasons why I'm always careful, and I say there are some elements within the Israeli government who don't like our peace process, because there are a lot of elements within the Israeli government that actually do like our peace process. They recognize that this indefinite campaign is not good for them either. And the Epstein thing is interesting because as much as I know, Prime Minister Netanyahu, not a particularly popular person in the United States of America right now, Epstein seemed to be connected to the elements of the Israeli deep state that were left of center. Like I've always found that fascinating. It wasn't like he was super connected to the right of center of Israeli politics. America, he was connected across the board. Like he had Republican friends, he had Democratic friends. He had much deeper connections to the Israeli left of center than right of center. I don't know what that means.
He was hanging out with Steve Bannon and Noam Chomsky.
Exactly. He had, again, in America, he had friends across the political spectrum in a way he didn't necessarily have in Israel.
So JD Vance will say Epstein was compromising people. He'll say there was definitely an operation. He'll say Epstein had connections to Israeli intelligence. He'll say he goes to his deathbed believing there's a story. He will say all of that with a straight face. What he will not say, what he will never say, is that the man at the center of that operation had over 3,000 documented connections to Donald Trump. That's the line. Everything up to that line, JD is your guy. A truth teller. An OG conspiracy theorist who went down every rabbit hole. The moment you cross that line, no credible evidence, absurd, Democratic hoax, and Joerogan, the man who spent 3 hours asking Mark Andreessen what he thinks about everything, could not find one follow-up question.
It's sometimes a little bit of a gray area between, some of the people who were alleged victims were also alleged co-conspirators. And so what DOJ tried to do was kind of make that judgment as best they could and release as much as possible.
But it's clear that he was trying to get in contact with people that he felt were influential. It was clear that he was trying to get people to get together on the island and meet at parties. So there was something he was doing where he was trying to either influence people or compromise people.
Correct.
So it's not – there's some sort of an operation that was going on.
There is a story there, and I will go to my deathbed believing there's a story there, but I can't prove it. And I promise you there's not some document that at least I'm hiding that allows us to prove exactly what was going on and how.
He was also trying to get scientists, and this is one of the reasons supposedly
100%.
why he got that ranch in New Mexico.
So a friend of mine has this element. Okay, sorry, I should step back. Conspiracy theories, one of the ways you discredit a conspiracy theory, I thought about this a lot, is to try to hide it. Another way you discredit a conspiracy theory is by flooding the zone. So one of the things I've tried to do when looking at all this stuff is to try to understand sort of where it fits in and to, try to separate the real from the fake. But one really interesting element of the whole Jeffrey Epstein saga, okay, so he dies in 2019, right? This is at the very end of the first Trump administration. His death coincides very, very closely. This is not my observation. This is a friend, but I don't want to reveal confidences here. It coincides very closely with the end of what you might call the era of censorship in academia. So back in 2019, 2020, we reached sort of peak academic censorship where people wouldn't publish a medical study because it might have sort of disparate impact racial undertones, or people were getting fired from academia for not doing land acknowledgments, stuff like that, okay? I'm not saying that stuff has completely gone away, but Epstein, we know, was funding a ton of scientists. By the way, where did his money come from? He was funding a ton of scientists, but like when he died, it's almost like the era of censorship started to break, because he was also plugged into a lot of in academia, but also, he was plugged into the social media companies. Like, this is a dude who knew everybody. He knew everybody. So, look,
so where did his money come from?
Well, from giving, part of it is suspect tax advice and setting up tax schemes for a lot of very, very rich people.
Right, but why was he motivated to influence academia, and what was the purpose?
I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I have theories. There's of course
Well, most people think he was Mossad.
Yeah, Mossad or CIA or some other deep state, whether in America or Israel or another country, or both. Look, he clearly had connections to the highest levels of American intelligence. He clearly had connections to the highest levels of Israeli intelligence.
Okay, so JD Vance just told you Epstein was almost certainly connected to American and Israeli intelligence at the highest levels, had his fingers in academia, in social media, in the tax structures of the ultra-rich, was running a blackmail operation, was compromising the powerful, and the President of the United States, who was in Epstein's contact book, flew on his plane, attended his parties, and was named over 3,000 times in the documents that JD Vance's own administration released, had zero involvement. Never seen a single piece of credible evidence. Brilliant. This is what a 2028 presidential campaign looks like when it's still wearing its VP costume. JD Vance came on this podcast to do one thing: protect Donald Trump, protect Peter Thiel's investment in the administration, and build himself a reputation as the guy who looked into Epstein and found nothing on the people who matter. No mention of the 3,000 references. No mention of the flight logs. No mention of the contact book. No mention of what Theo Vaughn raised, and got called crazy for raising, in that same chair. We've watched Joe push back on nutritionists. We've watched him push back on scientists. We've watched him interrupt a rainforest researcher mid-sentence to fact-check him with a chatbot. And JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, lying through his teeth about the most documented trafficking scandal in modern history, got 17 minutes of nodding, and, yeah, right, interesting. The Vice President of Peter Thiel, the future candidate of Peter Thiel, the guy who just told you he's never seen a single piece of credible evidence about the man named 3,000 times, in Joerogan's chair, with Joerogan nodding along. This is what compromise looks like, mate. The top comment on this episode has 11,000 likes, and it just says, "The Peter Thiel Experience." Joe's own audience already knows. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.